If you're like me, you really love The Crown. It is a fascinating retelling of famous figures. Obviously, on this show, we explore a lot of royal and what I always like to call royal adjacent people. So, people who are essentially royal, but like may not actually have the title. The first episode just recently was on the Kennedys, for instance. They are what I would refer to as royal adjacent. The Crown is fascinating because it fixates on royalty. Not too far into the show, a couple seasons in, they had a very interesting figure show up. And she, for most of the time, was in a nun's outfit. And she kind of skulked about the halls, and before long, she was gone. They sort of glaze over this character. In the show, she's referred to with a little bit of annoyance, a little bit of irritation. Some people seem a little weirded out. Certainly an endearing quality and definitely a bit of love. But they don't really go super into this person. And that person is Prince Philip's mother, Princess Alice of Greece. So I didn't really know a lot about Princess Alice. I had heard all about Margaret. I'd heard all about Queen Elizabeth. I'd heard a lot about Philip. Obviously, everything Charles and forward I was pretty aware of. But I didn't know much about his mother, or for that matter, where he came from. So I started to do some digging. So let's dial it back quite a bit from way before The Crown ever starts. We're going to go into the Victorian age. So we're talking about the 1800s. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert are in power, and they are madly in love with each other. She's a little feisty. He kind of balances her out. She's in charge, but he's very much her right-hand man. The two of them were really interesting in that they actually had desks that would face one another, and they would work pretty much right across from each other, and they would bounce ideas, and they would debate, and they would bicker, but they would always make up, and they were always romantically connected to one another. So much that she very much considered him the absolute love of her life. And he must have been, because she had 9 children with Albert. 9. And those children went on to marry and have other children with princes and princesses all over Europe. So Victoria is very much actually considered like kind of the mother of European royalty, and she very much is, because she literally is the mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, etc. of like pretty much all of the royal families, especially at the time of our story. So one of these kids is this girl named Alice, and Alice is beloved, and she falls in love, and she has her own family. And unfortunately, at the time that she has her own family, while she's still very young, the whole family gets sick. And Alice, who is not the Alice of our story, this is Queen Victoria's daughter, she contracts the illness while she's trying to take care of her family, and unfortunately, she succumbs to this illness. So she dies when her kids are young. Now, one of her children was a woman, was a young girl at the time that she named after her own mother, Victoria. So we've got Queen Victoria, her daughter Alice, who then has her own daughter named Victoria. But now that daughter, because of this unfortunate circumstance, does not have a mom. So Queen Victoria and Albert kind of take in, like, they take care of their descendants quite a bit. And even after Albert passes, Victoria very much is a part of all of these people's lives. So when her daughter passes away, she sees her granddaughter without a mom, and she's like, you know what? I'm your mom now, essentially. So she raises her very much as like essentially unofficially her 10th kid, along with her siblings, but we're going to focus on Victoria. So Victoria is brought up by Queen Victoria. She's brought up very dutiful and very proper, everything you would kind of expect that family to create. And then when she grows up and falls in love, she goes and finds herself a very unusual cat. So the dude that she finds is none other than Prince Louis of Battenberg. Now, he's interesting. So not to detract from Victoria, she was wonderful too, but like this guy led a very odd life. So Louis of Battenberg, before he decides that he wants to get hitched with Queen Victoria's granddaughter, Louis of Battenberg is in the military and he is living his best life. This dude is all over the world, and he's known to be dancing with all of the beautiful women he can find. And he's almost like Romeo and Romeo and Juliet, where like he falls in love with like every woman he ever meets, including one woman in Jamaica that apparently he fell in love with so hardcore that he thought he was gonna die. Like a little bit dramatic, but a very eccentric dude. A bit on the flamboyant side. He loves to dance. He loves to dress in his regalia. He loves having all of his military medals just shining and gleaming. He's a very dramatic, interesting guy. So much so that he actually has a full chest tattoo of a dragon that went all the way down through his, like, beyond his legs. This is a full body dragon tattoo on a prince of Battenberg in the Victorian era. So the 1800s, like that's just wild, honestly. So this fully tattooed worldly guy who has been sowing his royal oats for as long as he wanted, eventually meets Queen Victoria's granddaughter and is like, that's the one I want. The one who's completely different than me in every conceivable way. I'm gonna marry her. And she feels it too. She's like, this guy is spicy. This is interesting. He won't be boring. I think I'm in love with him too. So it takes some convincing on like, you know, the Victoria, like the Queen Victoria side of things. But the two of them do eventually get married. And they actually balanced each other out really well, kind of like Albert and Victoria did, the original Victoria did. So you've got two polar opposite people of very different walks of life who find a match. And they get along pretty well. They do really well. It doesn't take too long for them to get pregnant. And in 1884, they do just that. And in February 25th, 1885, at Windsor Castle in the tapestry room where she herself was born not too long before that, Princess Victoria gives birth to her first child, Princess Alice, a Hessian princess that was to be raised as an English princess, very much under the sharp gaze of Queen Victoria herself, her great-great-grandmother. And thus starts our second episode of Crown Gilded and Screwed, where we are going to be going into the absolutely batshit crazy, awesome, sometimes very terrifying but brave, bizarre life of Princess Alice of Greece, sometimes known as Princess Andrew, Philip's mother, and Queen Elizabeth's mother-in-law. So early into Princess Alice's life, everything is great. People adore her, they dote on her. She's this beautiful, beautiful little girl, and she's lively, and she's sprightly a little bit, and she's known for having like a very big personality. And the Queen Victoria dotes on her. She officially is the one who is to say when she's asked, what is this girl's name? She will go by Alice. She writes about her in her diary regularly. This kid is christened and she is brought out just on the town. Everybody gets to meet her and everybody just falls in love with the little baby. Who in Queen Victoria's diaries, I actually saw that she capitalizes the B of baby, which was just like an interesting little footnote, but that's how she referred to her. But Alice is off to a great start. And it seems to go pretty well. Like both her parents are absolutely enamored with her. Her father returns, of course, to his military duties, and his mother returns to her duties with her family and very much dotes on her daughter. And during that time, she starts to realize, though, in like maybe the first year, that something's a little bit off with her kid. Seems to be picking up on stuff. She's standing. She seems strong. She seems healthy, but she's not trying to talk. And around the time that a kid normally starts to talk, like between 1 and 2, they expected her to be like trying out some words, and she wasn't. She was also not really responding very much when she was being spoken to. And before long, her mom's like, that's it. I've got to take this kid into the doctor. I need to make sure for myself what is going on with her. And the doctor confirms, unfortunately, that she is congenitally deaf. And what that means is during either her birth or even before her birth, she was deaf, like from the beginning. Probably never really heard very much. And that it would be a permanent thing, and she was just going to be deaf for the rest of her life. And that's a very That's a heart-wrenching thing for a mom to hear, but especially when you're a royal and you were raised by Queen Victoria, where like shit cannot go wrong. It is all about appearances. And Queen Victoria was the absolute OG of your personal PR. Like, she was the first person to ever use photographs to advertise the royal family as this perfect but loving and relatable family. Like, she very much embraced that. And so now by this point, it's off and running. It's an institution. And Victoria, the younger Victoria, who was raised in this and was very much taught all of that, now realizes that her absolutely adorable baby that she loves so much is deaf. And how are we going to handle this? And how is she going to have a good life in, the Victorian era? Like, it's hard enough now to have deafness, but to live with it back then it had to have been so difficult to navigate that. So she's raised by Queen Victoria, though, so it's very much like you're gonna figure it out kind of an attitude. And she does sort of the opposite of what gentle parenting is, and she tells everyone around her, you know what? My kid's smart. She's gonna have to figure this out because she's gonna have to live this life. And we are not going to coddle her. We are not going to repeat our phrases to her. If she can't figure out what you said, that is her loss. She's gonna have to handle it, because we are not going to slow things down for her. She will rise up to the challenges that are brought to her. I believe that she can do it. And whether we agree or not with her decision, I certainly understand the decision, especially given the context of how she was brought up, and what she knew her kid was going to have to deal with in life, which is royal life, at royal parties and with diplomats. She knew her kid was going to have to handle that. And she believed in her, and it did work. Before long, Alice was able to speak and lip read in both English and German fluently, which is really quite an accomplishment for a little kid. She then adds French to that mix later on when she's in school, and she becomes fluent in French, German, and English in lip reading and in speaking, and is an absolute sensation. People love her. She becomes very close to Queen Victoria all the way up until her death when Alice was about 16 years old. She attends the funeral. She becomes close with her family the way anybody else would, and she's able to converse with them, which is great. She's especially close with her mom's sister, her Aunt Ella. Now, Aunt Ella was a very spiritual person. She was a beautiful princess herself, and she was married into the Russian monarchy. Keep in mind, this is the late 1800s to early 1900s. She marries into the Russian monarchy. So Alice is very close to them. Again, all of Europe were cousins and siblings and all of that, so this is very normal. Alice is very close to them, and she looks up to Ella quite a bit, along, of course, with her own mother. So when Alice becomes of age, when she's around 17 years old, in 1902, King Edward VII has his coronation, and he is crowned king. And she's Diana-esque at this point. She is renowned for her beauty. And the fact that she's deaf and can converse only makes her more alluring, frankly. And Edward VII himself, at his coronation, stated that Princess Alice would be the most beautiful bride of any European prince. So she shows up to the coronation, very much hoping that she's going to find a guy, kind of like all of the princesses were. And sure enough, she does. She finds and meets the absolutely adorable Prince Andrew of Greece. Prince Andrew is the fourth son of the Greek monarchy, of the king of the Greek monarchy. And he's a bit of a prankster, and he's he's very charismatic. I suspect he probably reminded her a little bit of her dad, who was very much a colorful character. And she herself is a little bit more reserved. And I think that she saw them as a very similar match to what her parents were. That's just my personal opinion, based on everything I've ever read about firsthand accounts regarding their personalities. And he adores her. He thinks she's great. He thinks she's impressive. She's obviously hot. And so they decide that they're going to start to date, court, if you will. And within a year, they do decide that they are getting married. And on October 6th of 1903, They make it official at a civil ceremony, and the next day they have a Lutheran wedding as well as a Greek Orthodox wedding in two different churches on the same day. So now it's official for both religions as well as in the civil court. They are married and they are ready to start their family. Now, like her father, Andrew, who the family actually called Andrea, so we're just going to call him Andrea. Like her father, Andrea was in the military. He was obviously for Greece, and that was kind of his career. And she would stay in the palace in Athens, where they moved in 1904, where they shortly thereafter, in the next 2 years, do have two young daughters, Marguerite and Theodora. So everything seems like it's going great. She's got her guy. He's doing well in his military career. She's moved to Greece. She's a Greek princess now. She's having children. And despite the fact that this is a new country for her, she's an absolute sensation because the Greeks love her. Which is kind of surprising because the Greeks were not really sure how they felt about their own Greek monarchy. So the reason for this is that for this time period in 1903 to, like the early 1900s, the Greek monarchy really hasn't been around that long. It's only been around actually at this point for 70 years, which isn't that much time for a populace to get used to a new type of government, especially when the royal family is actually from Denmark. So they're not even Greek. They don't look Greek. They don't act Greek. They are from Denmark. They have been planted there as now I'm your king and queen and that's it. Which is a little bit jarring, obviously, for a populace who shares none of the qualities with this royal family, and now they're expected to revere them and shit. But what they do really love is Princess Alice because she's an outsider but owns it. And she is the great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria. So they have a lot of respect for that. And again, she's gorgeous, which never hurts. So she floats in, she's graceful, she's classy. She's from quote unquote real royalty in England. And she is absolutely beloved. And I think that they also kind of really appreciated that she goes out of her way to add a fourth language to her arsenal, and she becomes fluent in Greek, both lip reading and speaking, in almost no time. So she has a thing for languages despite the fact that she cannot hear anything. And that's really remarkable for anybody, but I give her a lot of credit for that, and I think the Greeks did too. They really appreciated that kind of effort. So she's trying to embrace them. She's starting to, she's having children. So now we're starting to perpetuate this monarchy thing. And while it's a bit of a shaky family situation for this monarchy, she's doing the best she can. And for the most part, she's thriving. So she is hit with a bit of a personal tragedy at this point. Her uncle Sergei, who is married to her princess Ella, was kind of controversial in Russia. And the Russians they've been pissed at the monarchy for a while now, and he is unfortunately assassinated. And the way that this is done is somebody plants a bomb in his carriage and he blows up. So obviously a sudden death, obviously absolutely devastating to the family, devastating for Ella specifically, but really affects Alice as well because she loves her aunt so much and because, it's a royal uprising, and if it could happen there, it could happen in Greece too. And all of the royal families were very much on edge for quite a while, and this did nothing to quell those worries. So in 1905, that happens. Alice is obviously bothered by this, but she is focusing on her own family. She's having other kids. She's trying to do her best in her world the best she can, and she wants to be able to be there for Ella. And that actually does end up happening about 2.5 to 3 years later when one of her cousins gets married in Russia. She flies in for the wedding, sees Ella, talks to her, and instead of seeing a widow embittered by the death of her husband, which would be completely understandable. I mean, I would be just the most bitter bitch in the universe if this happened to me. What she sees is Ella kind of doubling down on an aspect of her personality I kind of covered a couple of minutes ago, which is that Ella's a very spiritual person. Now, Ella, being her aunt, is a direct granddaughter of Queen Victoria. She is the original Alice's daughter. She is raised in the absolute most wealthy family that she could be raised in. She is the ultimate Nepo baby, but she kind of knows it. And she has a bit of self-reflection that is kind of unique for the time, I think. And she looks at it introspectively through her grief and goes, what causes this? What causes people to hate us so much? What is the reason my husband lost his life? Where are we the problem? And she looks around at her obscene wealth and her jewels, and she sees the poverty around her, and she realizes that's probably what it is. So Ella decides, you know what? Fuck that. It's not my fault that I'm royal. It's not my fault I was born into that. But it is under my control what I choose to do with it and what I choose to do with my life. And how am I going to use that privilege to try to make a difference for the better good, instead of just become this embittered, angry person. And so Ella, through this grief, finds this beauty and this strength, and more than anything is humbled. So what she does, and what she's telling Alice at the wedding that she's been doing, is she is establishing an order of nuns that are going to focus on nursing. And that's pretty innovative at this point. She's all excited about it. This is her new project. She's going to establish an order of nursing. She herself is becoming more religious, which to each their own. And it seems to be working for her. And she's like, I'm going to double down. I'm going to find a way to live a more righteous life than what I was living before. And I'm going to try to help the people that are in pain. So she establishes this religious kind of order of nurses. And she also wants to establish a new church. And Alice is eating this up. Alice is like, oh my God, this is amazing. And to top everything else off, Ella is giving away her shit. She literally is taking jewels that she owns and crowns and all these expensive garments and furniture and everything she owns, and she's just giving it away. And she's like, I don't need it. I don't want it. I didn't really earn it. I'm going to give this away. I need a simplified, stripped down, more humble life. This will help me focus on the good work that I can do for the community. So she's establishing a church now, and Alice is enamored. All she's done at this point is just really elevate in her brain where she places Ella in terms of like her hierarchy of what a good person is, which was already pretty damn high. She was her favorite aunt by far. So Alice attends the laying of like the foundational stone of this church and is all for it. She thinks it's great. She's really excited and pumped about this idea. And she also wants to get home to her kids. So her and Andrea go home, where she's just been rejuvenated by this powerful story about her aunt, only to find that shit has hit the fan while they've been gone. So there was a bit of an uprising in Greece, which, I mean, it was kind of headed there anyway. There wasn't a lot they could have done about it. She's just there at the wrong place in the wrong time, which is sort of what we cover on this show. So what ends up happening is the Ottoman Empire and Greece are at each other's throats like pretty much throughout history. And at this point, it's no different. They're pissed at each other again. And it's of course over land, and it's of course over who owns what. And Crete, which is at this point in life, or at this point in history, owned by the Ottoman Empire, has a parliament that wants to unionize with Greece. And the Athens government rejects that declaration, essentially. Everybody gets pissed off, and some disenfranchised Greeks kind of form a militia, and that kind of shoves Andrea out. Like, he is basically taken away from his post. He goes home, starts to hang out with his kids.
So this isn't like a permanent thing, though, at this point, because right around this time is when World War I starts to gear up, and they decide that they kind of need him. So he is brought back in, and he is then sent to the front. Now at this point, keep in mind, Alice is a very capable woman. Her husband is now sent to the front, which, I mean, that is his job, but she doesn't want to just stay there with the kids. She wants to also help, because she's probably at this point been pretty inspired by Aunt Ella. So she decides that she also is going to the front as a nurse. Keep in mind, this is a Windsor Castle born Queen Victoria's great-granddaughter princess. And she decides that instead of staying back in her castle, in amongst a bunch of people that don't really want her there anyway, she's going to leave her young children. At this point, she has a few. They're all girls at this point. She's going to leave her daughters, and she's going to go to the front to try to help out. And she becomes a nurse and actually works hands-on as you can get. There are photographs of her being a nurse. And she really finds a lot of gratitude and fulfillment in helping people, much like Ella does. So but the horrors of war are not lost on her. I suspect it probably helped, honestly, that she couldn't hear the screaming, but she did write to her mom about the pain people were going through, about the blood in the corridors, how overwhelming it was. Like, she's not without being affected quite a bit. So she works at the front as a nurse during World War I, which is, again, pretty wild, definitely brave, and something that's admirable that she does. It was totally optional and she chose to do it. All of this keeps happening, and eventually she ends up back home, and so does her husband, up until 1916, when Athens is bombed. And she's there with her kids, and she actually had to hide in a cellar during said bombing. So in 1917, her and her family are officially exiled, and they, on top of that, her Aunt Ella, who at this point, remember, has been very religious and very charitable and very much trying to do her best to create a better world, she is captured by the Bolsheviks, and she and a couple of others are put down into a mine shaft, and unfortunately, they are covered in stones, and then they are blown up. So Ella is murdered by the Bolsheviks now. And on top of that, Alice, who has been at the front already dealing with all of the stuff that happens when you see war firsthand, Alice is now exiled with her family. They run off and they start to feel the pressures of exile. So that exile does not last forever. In 1920, they do return, and they mostly hang out in Corfu, to be honest. And it's around that time in 1921 that Prince Philip is actually born. And he's born on the kitchen table, which is kind of interesting, like the dining room table where they all ate. That's where she has her son. But the problem is, even though they're back, the family is still in hot water. Like, they're still not really welcomed. And this return is kind of short-lived, and it isn't long until her husband is now tried for treason, mostly because of, the fact that the Greeks were pissed about how everything landed after World War I. But he's tried for treason, found guilty, and given a death sentence. However, in a backdoors deal, behind closed doors deal with King George V, he is rescued at the last minute. And it's because a show of ships shows up. And that show of force and support is the reason that Andrea and Alice and her kids are all able to flee. Now, they do luck out a little bit because, fortunately, their sister-in-law on Andrea's side is Maria Bonaparte, and she is very wealthy. She's also a psychoanalyst, which is pretty deep. So she's a princess, she's wealthy, and she's a psychoanalyst, and she has a house available just outside of Paris. So that is where the family flees to, and that's where they start to live out their life. At this point, though, Alice starts to really feel the pressures of all of the shit she's gone through. So now she's lost Ella. She, in a very violent way. Her husband was almost murdered for high treason. She has little kids. She has a brand new baby boy. And her daughters are they're getting up there in age, but they're still, they're still kids. She has a brand new baby boy. She's deaf, and it's starting to mess with her being at bigger gatherings because she can't keep track of what everybody's saying. See, it used to be that she could be a little bit more one-on-one, but now in exile in Paris, families' functions are a lot bigger, and she wouldn't know at a dinner table like what people were saying, and it starts to kind of mess with her head a little bit. And she starts to believe, unfortunately, that they were all laughing at her if something was funny and she didn't catch it. You know, I think more than anything, that paranoia had less to do with being deaf. It might have been triggered by that circumstance, but without being able to diagnose her, it was probably some form of PTSD from everything she had just gone through. Multiple times having to leave Greece, her husband almost dying, her aunt dying, the hell she saw in World War I at the front that she was not prepped for because she was not trained for this. She just, she did her best. And it was at a time where nobody was really diagnosing that. And I think we have to look in on what is about to happen to Alice with a bit of an empathetic gaze because of all of this, because she starts to fucking lose it. Basically, she more or less in the 20s begins to have an absolute nervous breakdown. And that's where shit gets wild. So at this point in 1928, she begins to snap, and she converts from Lutheran to Greek Orthodox, which, like, at this point, she's been a Greek princess for, the better part of almost 3 decades. It's kind of understandable that she would do this, if we're fair. But clinical studies have also shown that a dramatic shift in your religious affiliation sometimes does come as like an early onset to like psychological stuff. And it's a common thing to happen when someone is about to sort of go over the edge. She also, for a very brief period of time, actually kind of reverts into this other manic position mentally where she starts to actually acquire a lot. She starts to buy more jewelry. She starts to, she kind of goes in the reverse of what she's always been, and she starts to be very materialistic, which is not normal for Alice. Alice revered her aunt. She believed in being humble, and now suddenly she's buying stuff. And she's buying stuff, again, as sort of like a manic response to all the shit that's going on around her. And some of those things in 1929 turn out to be like spiritual and psychic books. Like, she would go and find like rare psychic books and buy them, and she would begin to tell people that she had healing hands, which, okay, not the worst, a lot of people feel that they are natural healers. It's, who's to say she didn't? Trying to be as graceful as I can about this. But she begins to believe that she has healing hands. And her family is going, she never said this shit before, but okay. Healing hands, fine. She's got all these spiritual books. She's always been spiritual. Not the biggest red flag. She's buying a lot of shit. Unusual for her, but she's a little stressed out, so maybe that's it. Then she does this weird thing where she starts to sit down on the floor and lay on the floor because she wanted to fully receive like the celestial messages she believes she's hearing in her head. She also stops. It's never officially said this way. Andrea starts to complain that she's not like fulfilling her domestic duties, but like there are some interpretations of that basically are saying she's probably not sleeping with him anymore. Which I understand him being upset about. Obviously, it's your spouse. You would like to share your marital bed with your spouse. She believes she's sharing her marital bed, though. In her head, she's having a lot of sex with her new husband, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. She believes she's fucking Jesus, literally. She starts to describe sexual interactions she believes she's happening with the Lord Jesus Christ as his official wife. This is where people start to have a bit of a problem with it. First of all, her husband is like, no, I'm your husband. You have 5 kids with me. What the fuck are you talking about? That you're having sex with Christ? No, you're not. What is going on? She starts to like hear voices in her head, and she believes it's God. So now let's look into who's around her at this point, because they're in Paris. So Princess Bonaparte, who again is a psychoanalyst, analyst, starts to suggest that maybe Alice get some help. And Alice's mother is also like, yeah, I don't know that this is great. She actually goes on record to say that she believes her daughter has anemia of the brain, which is harsh, but like, I mean, it is kind of an old-timey way of trying to understand what the hell's going on, because your kid thinks she's fucking Jesus. We can't be light about this. That's a thing. And that's maybe a thing that should be discussed. So, at one point, Alice decides that she's going to go to the French Riviera and spend Christmas alone. She comes back, no better, honestly. Still fucking Jesus, still has healing hands, still sitting on the floor so she can receive messages. Now she's telling everybody that she knows the suitable husbands for her daughters because the Lord sent her messages and visions, I assume in between sex. And at this point, people are like, no, we can't be doing this. Like, this is not, we're under enough stress right now. Like, we cannot deal with you. Like, this needs to be handled. So Bonaparte is like, I'm friends with Freud. Freud, obviously the father of psychoanalysis, makes some really goddamn bizarre recommendations for him. And I say that knowing full well that his normal recommendations were pretty off the wall. He was pretty much just throwing shit at a wall and hoping something sticked. Like, it's not like he was basing a lot of this on, like, I don't know, science. Like, a lot of it was just kind of shit he was hoping would work. A lot of guesswork in Freud's stuff. But Bonaparte and Freud are like, yeah, let's like maybe get her to a clinic. Let's talk about things. Now, the problem is therapy doesn't really work if the person getting therapy doesn't think they need therapy. And she thinks she's the correct one. And she doesn't see a problem. It's her mom and her husband and everybody else in her life that is like, no, you need to talk to somebody. This is weird. But she thinks everything's fine. So obviously it wasn't like therapy wasn't gonna work really well with her for a while because she thought she was fine. And she was like, I don't understand the problem here. I'm the chosen wife of Jesus Christ. You guys are the problem, not me. So you can't really have a conversation with somebody who's acting this way. Nonetheless, they try. And she goes through some pretty bizarre treatments. Now, there is no clear indication that she was consulted about this or that she signed off on it, because again, she doesn't really think anything's wrong. But basically, counter to most of the things that Freud, who was into psychoanalysis, normally would say, he actually recommended that her ovaries be subjected to severe amounts of x-rays, like concentrated x-rays. More or less to people used to do that so that it would like encourage menopause, which is a bizarre thing to want for somebody because back then they were like, menopause causes depression. So they were thinking like, they more or less were thinking about either spurring on menopause or that it would rejuvenate her ovaries. And at some point they started to believe that it was because she had some sort of real romantic connection with an Englishman at one point that was never consummated, and that repression was the reason she was starting to snap, because, you know, it couldn't possibly have been all of the shit she had just gone through. It had to clearly be a woman problem, like a ovaries issue. So to explain why Freud would come to this conclusion, along with like a lot of the doctors he hung out with, Freud didn't believe that psychoanalysis worked on everybody. And in her case, he didn't believe that it was going to help. He also was kind of part of this movement that believed in the rejuvenation of pretty much everybody's genitals. He himself actually had some work done. These would vary quite a bit. Sometimes it was castration. Sometimes it was the, how do I put this delicately? Sometimes it was the transplanting of the gonads of one person or animal into another person. Sometimes that was the suggested cure for homosexuality, which is obviously fucking horrible, but what they were thinking at the time. Just as a disclaimer, very much not okay with that. Very much a pro-LGBTQ channel, just going forward. But that did happen historically, and Freud had shit done to himself, and he would actually get like injected with stuff pretty regularly into his 70s so he could rejuvenate that. So it's not like this was the kind of thing that Freud only did to Alice. Like, he believed that this was actually like gonna help people. No medical indication that it ever did anything for anyone other than totally castrate and humiliate people. She was put through that. She was subjected to that. She very much hated it. And she checks herself the fuck out. And she's like, no, I don't need to be here. This is stupid. So she checks out. And that does not last long. Her mom is like, no, you're still crazy. I need you to go back into this institution. If you're going to check yourself out and you're still hearing things, then we need to take a more severe approach. So what her mother, Victoria, does is she takes Philip on a picnic when he's a little kid. This is a month after his mother checks herself out of, the clinic. She takes him on a picnic, and Alice is drugged with an orange. Men in white coats come, they pick her up, drugged out of her mind, out cold, and the next thing she knows, she's taken to Balmore Asylum. And now she's basically a prisoner. So just to recap, this girl goes from born at Windsor Castle, one of the great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria, married to a Greek prince, nurse at the front, like celebrated throughout Europe, celebrated in Greece, to exiled, to thinking she's fucking Jesus, literally, to now being a prisoner in an insane asylum. Quite the shift. Obviously she's pissed about this, and she actually tries to break the fuck out. Like, she does not go down without a fight. This woman is in her 40s. She's completely deaf. She's pissed. She wants to go home. She does not want to be here. And so she climbs out through the window of an asylum in the 30s in unrest Europe, almost in World War II ass Europe. She climbs out the window of an asylum, runs through the woods, probably just for visualization in some sort of a hospital gown, runs and almost makes it to the train station before they capture her ass and drag her back. Fucking what? So she escapes an insane asylum and then ends up back there all over again. They've got to deal with her again, and now she's pissed. But she also has to stay. And while she went through hell in this asylum, as everybody did who went to an asylum, she does start to deal with her shit. Now, in the meantime, Andrea has had enough. He's just done. He's been with her for a long time. He stuck it out as long as he felt he could. And he was like, you know what? Bitch thinks she's fucking Jesus. She won't have sex with me. She thinks she's having sex with the Lord. I've got other shit to do. I'm out. I can't deal with this. I've been through my own stress too. I've been around for this all this time. Now she's in an insane asylum. I'm done. The marriage is over. We are legally married, but I'm out. I gotta go live my life, man. I can't deal with this. Cruel, yeah, but I also kind of understand this point. I mean, I don't believe, you shouldn't abandon your spouse. You shouldn't, if they're going through a mental breakdown, obviously, but people didn't know shit back then. And also, he does have to live his life, and she thinks she's having sex and is already married to Jesus. What is this guy gonna be able to do at this point? She can't be reasoned with. So whether you agree with him or not, Andrea basically cuts out. He ends up hanging out in the French Riviera with some mistresses, and he just nopes out of everything. The daughters are now older. They all marry, for the most part, all of them marry German princes. in 1930s Germany. But again, shit hasn't happened yet. Like, it's normal to marry in all these different countries. They are married off to German princes while she's in the asylum, which means no, she does not get to go to her daughter's weddings, any of them, none of them, which just destroys her, honestly. Like, she already got enough of her own shit going on, and now she's got the guilt of that, and, you know, her son Philip is just fucking everywhere. So he gets like the raw end of the stick in this. Philip is kind of bounced around to all of these different houses, and he goes to boarding schools, but then like he never knows where he's gonna stay for like the holidays, because Andrea, while understandably pretty pissed at his wife, apparently just totally gives up on his son. And that, for me, like, as an adult, like, I can look at that and be like, dude, you could have kept your kid, though. Like, you could have been there for your son, who was there when mommy was taken away. Like, he was on a picnic, but he was basically there. And he's a little boy, and no one's at home. His sisters are all married off, but now it's like, you know, Nazi-occupied Germany soon. So now he can't even really hang out with them. And now you're just gonna fuck off in the French Riviera and not hang out with your son, not be there for him, not raise him or anything like that. Shitty, right? Like, poor form on Andrea's part. That's where he completely loses me. Fortunately for Philip, Alice had a little brother, Louis Mountbatten, who takes him under his wing and very much, for good or for bad, becomes like his surrogate father from then on out. But that's through necessity, and it's a good thing that he had somebody, because, you know, a kid needs somebody. And mommy's obviously dealing with her own stuff, and dad's fucking bitches in France, so apparently he's just done. And that's, by the way, pretty much all we hear about when it comes to Andrea. His story almost certainly ends there. He dies in 1944, and he's just done. So Alice, snapping back to the center of the story, Alice is handling her shit, though. She stops believing that she's fucking Jesus. She calms down the spirituality. She kind of comes back to earth a little bit. And 2 years in, she's writing her mom. She's writing her mom, and she's like, let me come home. Just let me get out of here. I need to get out of here. This is crazy. I'm miserable. I'm working on it. I admit I obviously lost it a bit. It is time for me to get out. And Victoria loves her daughter, and so she's like, you know what? As long as you can, like, return to reality with the rest of us, yes, I will release you. So she does actually get released 2 years after she is whisked away. Unfortunately, she finds out after she's released who was behind her capture in the first place. Not only is it not the doctors like she had spent 2 years believing it was, it's her family, and not just her family, it's her mom. And like, your mom doing that, I understand Victoria's position. I probably would have tried to get my kid help too. Because, you know, it's still your kid, even though it's a 40-year-old lady. Like, the poor woman didn't know what to do with her anymore. Like, she had to be reasoned with. It was getting to be a bit much. But Alice feels completely betrayed. And she never really forgives her mom. Like, and on Alice's position, I can understand that, because she was taken beyond her will. She checked herself out when they tried to make it optional, but she was also drugged and carried off by men in white coats, literally. So, and also twice because of the escape thing. So now Alice is absolutely done with everybody's shit. She is like, fuck these bitches, I'm out. I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to deal with my husband. I don't want to deal with anybody else. I wasn't able to go to my daughter's wedding. My son is who knows where, hanging out with my brother. No one needs me, apparently, because they just were fine with letting me rot away in an insane asylum. Fine. You guys don't want me? I don't want you. And she just lives life as a nomad for several years. She just wanders around to like hostels and just boarding houses and just kind of lives just this kind of listless existence. Pissed. I mean, and validly so. I think a little bit of the nomad thing was probably because she was trapped for 2 years. You know, she lost 2 years of her life. But the other part of it is just she doesn't want to go back to royal life. She doesn't feel wanted and she doesn't want to see them anymore. She's done with their shit. And also is kind of not raising her kid. Like, she wanted a relationship with Philip, but he was off living his life at that point, and she didn't really feel like she had much of a purpose. But she very much missed her family, and she occasionally would write her mother, but the relationship was not going to repair. Until another tragedy strikes. Her youngest daughter, Cecile. So Cecile, while pregnant with her child, 8 months pregnant, is on a plane in the mist and fog and with her family, and they crash into something because they cannot see anything in the fog. And she plummets to the earth. Everybody in the plane dies. She actually apparently gives birth during the crash, and everyone perishes, including the baby. Like, it is awful. And the funeral is held in Nazi Germany, obviously, because that's where they all live. Philip goes to the funeral. Andrea actually goes to the funeral, and Alice finally comes out of the woodwork and is like, fuck, my kid just died. My grandchildren are gone. I missed all of that time. So she does reunite with her family at the funeral in Germany. And from then on out, she kind of comes back. Obviously with quite a bit of grief, a little bit of perspective. She wants a relationship with her family again, and she returns to Athens. At this point, she kind of has this delusional, not like literally delusional, but she kind of has this wishful thinking moment where she gets a flat in Athens and like writes excitedly to Philip, who at this point is like, you know, he's a young adult dude, about to have a military career because Mountbatten set it up for him because he's been raising the kid. And she writes to Philip saying that she's so excited for them to live together. And as much as Philip would have loved to be with his mother, he had a life to lead. And it was like, hang out in Athens where his family's been run out 1,000 fucking times, or go live his life as a military officer, as his grandfathers did and his great-grandfathers, again with the tattoo. All of those guys were in the military. So Philip's like, you know what? This is a better option for me. My uncle, Louis Mountbatten, he was in the military. Like, he set this up for me. I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to go live my life. I can't just be in a flat with my mom in Athens. Like, unfortunately, the time has passed. And she was upset about it. I think she really was looking forward to like sort of making up for lost time, but she kind of also understood. So Philip runs off and joins the military, and he starts to live out his life. She stays in Athens, and around this time is when World War II hits. So at the onset of World War II, this is where Alice really begins to like step into her new section of her life, which is absolute service. So to recap, we have her life in as an English princess, and then we have her, which is couldn't be more royal. And then we have her life with her husband, which is obviously, for the most part, a very loving marriage up until the end, but is a very rocky situation because of the political atmosphere. Her life as a mother is impacted by that. Then we have her, we're going to call it marriage with Jesus, her insane asylum days, her escape from an insane asylum, then her recovery phase, which took a lot of effort, and then after that, just this period of roaming around aimlessly like a nomad. Now we have World War II Alice, and World War II Alice is of a different ilk. So she decides, while everybody else is fleeing Athens, at this point, she's done running from Athens. She's done not being here anymore. She's a Greek princess, goddammit. She doesn't care what Andrea's up to. She's staying in Athens. And she's going to help the people, very much the way Ella would have loved. So in Athens, there is severe poverty at this point. The war is just wrecking them. They barely recuperated from World War I in the first place. Now, in World War II, there's starvation everywhere. And despite a lack of supplies, Alice manages to effectively establish one of the most successful soup kitchens in all of Europe at the time, which is really admirable and a testament, frankly, to her organizational skills and her dedication to the work. So she's feeding the poor. She's also sneaky as shit. And this is where this girl fucking shines. So she's got a sister in Sweden. He's married to a Swedish prince. So what she decides to do is she decides to fly to Sweden to go visit her sister, but secretly is bringing back supplies to Greece, like under the guise of visiting her sister, which is really badass and very clever. She also gets even sneakier. So she was friends with the Cohen family, which is a Jewish family in Greece. And the Cohen family, like a lot of Jewish people in Greece, is being run out. They're being, frankly, snapped by the Nazis and taken away. And so Alice sees them on the street and she ushers them into her apartment, like right as they're going to be captured pretty soon. Like she knows their time is running out. She snatches them up and hides them in her little flat in Athens and just keeps them there away from Nazi gaze for the war. And at one point, she gets questioned by German officers. And now at this point, it's in the 40s. She's getting up there in age. She looks like a little old lady now. And at this point, she's starting to learn to play people a little bit better. So these German officers who don't know her from Eve, really, like they know who she is, but they don't know her. They come up to her and they start to ask her questions. And Alice plays dumb. She plays up the deaf thing and pretends to not be able to understand a word that they said because she can't hear anything. She doesn't know what their questions are. She completely pretends that she doesn't understand a word. To review, this girl has been in German fluent since she was a baby, like since she learned to talk. That's one of her 2 native languages that she learned simultaneous to each other when she was a little kid. And her mom was like, you're going to have to sink or swim and that's it. That's one of the first 2 languages this girl ever learned. And she's looking dead ass at these German officers, just completely pretending that she just doesn't know what they're saying. And they believe her and they leave. And so she's able to play dumb and basically make an ass out of the Nazi officers and save the Cohen family's lives. And it works, which is just fucking so cool. So she's the only reason that family survives the war, is that she just hides them out while she's got a soup kitchen, while she's jetting off to Sweden to pretend to visit her sister. Well, we might actually say hi to her sister, but jetting off to Sweden, grabbing supplies and smuggling them in and all of that stuff. She's also playing dumb to these German officers. At one point, she does actually communicate with a German officer and he asks her if there's anything he can do for her. And she basically says, you guys can get out of my country. Like, just the balls on this woman. Really have to respect it. But again, she's always been brave. Like, she may have gone through her moment, which honestly, considering everything, understandable. She's always been brave. This has always been a bad bitch. This is a girl who in her own way fought at the front line as a nurse, like fought, in her own capacity. This is a woman who has faced exile multiple times. She faced the possible execution of her husband. She fucking went to an insane asylum. She's been subjected to a bunch of shit on her ovaries because Freud thought he knew something. And again, was wrong. She deals with all of this. She sneaks out of an insane asylum. This has never been a wilting flower of a human being. This has always been a woman made of just steel. And it really comes through during the occupation of Nazi Germany, of Athens during World War II. So eventually, obviously, Athens is liberated. Everybody's happy, to go back to normal, essentially. I'm obviously glossing. That takes a lot longer. But she decides that she wants to stay. Now, in 1947, she is met with some wonderful news. Her beloved Philip has fallen in love. And he didn't just fall in love. He fell in love with, the woman to fall in love with. the adorable Princess Elizabeth, who is next in line to the throne of England. So now her son, who's like not had a home most of his life, is gonna be the spouse of the Queen of England. And she's overjoyed. She's overjoyed for many reasons. First of all, it brings her family full circle back to Windsor Castle, which is where she's from. And there is something very touching about that, because that's part of like her upbringing and her childhood. And it also brings her family back together. Yes, by the way, that does mean Philip and Elizabeth are cousins, but we're just gonna, as we always do with these stories, we're just gonna pretend that that's not a thing. Because you don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it. It's just best that we don't. We all know it's true. So we're not going to get into it. Let's just pretend. Let's just pretend it's not a thing. So they are married. They're getting married. And Alice is like, you know what? I didn't get to go to my other kids' weddings. That was bullshit. And now Andrea's not around anymore, so fuck him. I'm showing up. So she does. She shows up in this beautiful purple silk outfit, and she looks every bit the princess she always was. And she's so overjoyed that her son has found love, which he did for all of his shit. He did love Elizabeth. She's so excited for her son and so proud of her son that she actually goes into her old reserve of tiaras from when she was younger and an English princess, which apparently are just sitting somewhere in like a vault or something. She goes in and gets one of her tiaras out, and she gives it to Philip, and she tells him, select the best stone out of this to make her ring. Because she wants to be a part, she doesn't own anything anymore. She's been giving everything up. She's not, she's a princess, but she's not living a princess life. She doesn't have much, but she does have tiaras that she doesn't touch. And she knows that this can be her gift to her new daughter-in-law, because she wants a family still. She still wants to be in the fold again, and she wants to be able to provide something. And so as a very touching gesture, she takes one of the tiaras of her youth and she gives it to her son, so that he, who doesn't have very much, has something to give his bride that's fitting of an English queen. And that is actually, he does select a beautiful stone, and he does make Elizabeth's engagement ring, which is fabulous. Very much a mother-in-law move. That's a very queenly, princessly mother-in-law move for a woman who has not been living like a princess. Very classy. She shows up, she's there, she's so overjoyed, she's happy to see him, but she's also ready to get the fuck out, because she really doesn't want this life. She just knows that this is going to be her son's life, and she doesn't want to be kept from that. So she gets back to Athens in very short order, where she continues to try her best at being the type of person I think that Ella would have been proud of, and I think she really succeeds at this point. She does maintain a good relationship with Philip from then on out for the most part. When he has Prince Charles with Elizabeth, Alice is very much a part of the family. She wants to know her grandchild. She was kept from everybody else because of World War II and all of the things that they went through. This is her opportunity to be close to somebody that she can call family. So she is very overjoyed to be a grandma, and she does participate, but she's not in court anymore. What she does instead is goes and lives her own life, which is kind of what she's the best at. And she decides to kind of dial it back to what Ella was trying to do originally all those years ago. And she starts to establish a nun's order. Now, she never officially takes to the cloth, she doesn't actually do the vows, but she lives that life. But she didn't want the shut away, cloistered life for these nuns. She wanted them to be active members of the community helping the poor. And she herself gets her hands dirty, as she always has whenever she has the opportunity, and she helps people too. She also establishes an orphanage so that she can help young orphans from the war. And that's really where her life's work begins. And so she takes all of the hardship that she went through, all of the stuff that she went through specifically because she was a royal, frankly, and she turns it into strength, and she turns it into something incredible. While she's doing this, Elizabeth loses her father. So that means, while yes, they're grieving, she's now going to be queen. So during her coronation, this is kind of crazy. During her coronation, a lot of debate is up in the air on how they're going to go about it. And Philip is kind of disenfranchised in his own marriage now because, like, he has to give up his military career. He has to give up flying planes. Like, the crown kind of covers it, but in real life, like, it's just as bad, if not worse. Like, he has a difficult time adjusting to real royal life because he never really was, like, brought up royal, you know? Like, he was always in and out of houses and stuff. So now he doesn't really feel like he has a purpose. So Elizabeth, to give him, like, a little job, puts him more or less in charge of the coronation. And even then, like, him and the Queen Mother butt heads, and it's this whole thing. There's a lot of drama about what he's going to be able to actually participate in. The one thing he actually does win on, though, is that this is going to be the first televised coronation in all of history. The coronation is considered a very spiritual experience, and it was very, very controversial to invite cameras and therefore the public into this mystery. And the old guard didn't really love it. The Queen Mother hated the idea, and Princess Elizabeth wasn't sure where she was at, but she also, like, wanted to give him a W. You know, like, he'd been taking L's for a while. So he does get his way, and thank God he does, because we are faced with the best footage of, like, this batty old lady who turns up. Keep in mind, a few years before this, she was in a silk purple dress and had one of her tiaras taken apart to be a ring on this woman's, the queen's finger. Now she's showing up for the coronation, and we have footage of it. And she's walking solemnly in a nun's outfit, in the habit. Again, she's a princess. She's the mother of the prince. And she shows up as a straight up gray nun. Kind of. She's still a princess, and she's still who she used to be. So while yes, it is a nun's outfit, it's actually couture, designed by the House Balmain. Like, so it's like couture nun, but it's a nun's outfit, designed specifically for her from one of the biggest fashion houses at the time. Just, you know, why pick one side when your grass can always be green? So she shows up with no warning as now she's a nun. And Philip's like, what is this shit? This mother of his that's just been all over the damn place shows up in a nun's habit and solemnly walks as this, like, otherworldly being down the chapel and attends. And it's a very strange moment for everybody, but that's who she is now, and the hell if she's gonna let anybody tell her who she's supposed to be at this point. She is there to be representative, supportive, attendant, and to make a point. And she does, in couture, which, I don't know, I kind of love. So, she returns back to Greece. Now, this pisses Philip off a little bit, because he very much wants his mom to just live in the castle with him. He's like, would you just get out of Athens? Like, get out. Why are you still there? I get that you've got work to do. You've done a lot of amazing work. Come live with us, though. Like, I need to be able to make sure, I need my eyes on you at this point. I'll never know what you're up to. And it's just maybe for the best that we just have maybe that quality time. She fights him tooth and nail. And for the most part, for most of her life, going forward, she kind of wins. Like, for a decent amount of time, she still gets to be in Athens. Until it becomes so ungodly unsafe for her that Philip finally takes the plane, shows up, and is like, you're done. Like, let's go. We gotta go. You're getting older. You can't live here anymore. It is not safe for you. You've done amazing work. I know you hate this. You've got to come home. Like, we've got to come live with us. Like, it's not even your choice anymore. So Alice finally begrudgingly comes with him. And she lives out the last 2 years of her life in Windsor Castle, where she began it. Only now the only things that she owns are, like, 3 dressing gowns and a nun's habit, and she just, like, wanders the halls smoking cigarettes in Windsor Castle, just being a bizarre haunting fixture around the corners. And apparently the only way that you would know she was coming is you could smell her cigarette smoke, like, down the hall. And that's how you knew she was pitter-pattering away. Finally, in the 1960s, Alice does actually pass away. She does so quietly in her sleep. She was a part of her family's life after all. And all that she possessed anymore were 3 dressing gowns that were given actually to the nurses that looked after her. And she leaves behind this incredible legacy. Fun footnote, actually, it wasn't the last weird thing she had up her sleeve, though. Like, poor Philip, honestly. Never knew what his mother was up to next and kind of made that point of like, I need to fucking know what you're up to. Well, she found a way to surprise him anyway, because in her final wishes, she asked to be interred at the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, which is not easy to do. So for a little while, but like that's her final wishes, and like this is his mom. So for a long time, that doesn't happen. Until the late 90s, early 2000s, when Philip finally is able to actually get it done. Like the royal house of England brokers this deal, and based on the work she did rescuing the Cohens, as well as like funding this orphanage and, you know, everything that all the good she did, she was actually finally granted entrance. And that's where she's buried now. He transported her, she took her remains and flew them out, and that's where she is. She's in Jerusalem. Through a lot of efforts, he was able to finally make that happen for her. And he was able to plant a tree in her honor. And that is the end of the story of the wildly unpredictable, insanely brave, sometimes batshit, but very, very cool, beautiful Princess Alice of Greece. Thank you for watching. If you really enjoyed this, as I hope you did, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.